The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, episode 22, Building Slowly. Learning to pace the new welcome back to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, the space where we strip away the layers, sit with the raw stuff, and talk about what most people skip past. In our last series, Shadow Emotions, episodes 1 to 10, we explored the depths of feelings most people avoid: envy, lust, anger, shame, guilt, apathy, and control. And in Integration and Alchemy, episodes 11 to 20, we looked at what happens when those shadow parts are brought into the light and transformed. Now, in this new arc, Ashes to Architecture, the rebuild, we're asking what comes after the burning down. How do you rebuild without rushing into the same walls you once had to tear apart? Today's episode is about pacing. The pressure to rebuild fast is real, from society, from fear, and from our impatience. But when we rush, we risk recreating the very structures we worked so hard to dismantle. We'll explore how to find the right rhythm for your new life, how to recognize when speed is just fear in disguise, and why patience in the early stages can save you years of repair down the road. So let's begin. The urge to hurry when the dust is still settling, the instinct to rush in and rebuild can feel almost irresistible. Society tells us to bounce back quickly. Fear whispers that if we don't act fast, we'll lose momentum. Our impatience fuels the desire to get it over with, to skip the uncertainty and jump straight to stability. But haste has a quiet cost. It risks recreating the very patterns we worked so hard to dismantle. Running before you've found your feet. Think of the first time you tried to run after a long illness or injury. The desire to move quickly was there. Your mind remembered what it felt like to run, but your body wasn't quite ready. Every step carried the risk of misalignment or re-injury. Life rebuilds work in the same way. When we push ahead too soon, the structures we put in place may look solid, but beneath the surface they rest on unstable ground. The walls may stand for a while, but if the foundation hasn't had time to set, even a small stress can bring them down again. Personal reflection, I've learned that speed can be both a gift and a trap. In the past, I equated fast progress with success. The sooner I could get back to normal, the sooner I could feel safe. But looking back, I can see moments where that speed came at a cost. I've pushed through work or decisions so quickly that I later had to backtrack, fix errors, or even start again. The pace of rebuilding isn't just about how fast you can move forward. It's about how deeply you can root each step before taking the next one. These days, I value the slower rhythm, not because I've lost ambition, but because I've gained perspective. It's the difference between sprinting to escape something and walking towards something you truly want to last. Psychological insight research in self-regulation theory, Baumeister, Heatherton and Tice, 1994, suggests that pacing ourselves during change is a form of delayed gratification, the ability to resist the short-term reward of quick results in favor of the long-term stability of well-built structures. In rebuilding phases, this means holding back when the urge is to push ahead and allowing time for integration between stages. From a neuroscience standpoint, dopamine-driven motivation can be deceptive. Dopamine spikes when we anticipate a reward, which means that at the start of a rebuild, we may feel an intense drive to finish, so we can experience the relief of completion. But when we rush, the brain is still operating in the heightened state of anticipation, not in the calmer, more reflective state needed for wise decision-making. In my work and life, I've experienced this firsthand. There have been moments when I moved too quickly, pushing through projects before double-checking for consistency, only to find errors that set me back later. I've also seen this in personal relationships, particularly before my spiritual awakening, when the desire to connect deeply and quickly sometimes meant laying down fragile foundations. Since slowing my pace, I've found I can make decisions I can stand by. I have space to analyze, process, and plan in ways that benefit all involved. And by taking time in my creative work, I not only improve its quality, but also learn from it, spotting future pitfalls before they arrive. Insight prompts. Where in your current rebuild are you feeling the urge to hurry? If you slowed down in that area, what new information or perspective might emerge? Theory and action. Choose one area of your life where you're tempted to rush. For the next 2 weeks, Intentionally halve the pace. Take double the time you think you need before making each decision or moving to the next stage. Notice whether your choices change and whether new insights emerge that you wouldn't have caught at full speed. The pressure to prove. When we're in the early stages of rebuilding, there's often an invisible audience, real or imagined, watching our progress. Friends, family, colleagues, or even social media followers may be curious or quietly skeptical about how we'll bounce back. This can create an unspoken pressure to prove ourselves quickly, to show visible results before the foundation is truly ready. The illusion of fast success, fast results look impressive from the outside. They create the illusion of control, the sense that we've not only survived but are thriving. But the danger with chasing visible progress is that we can start building for an audience instead of for ourselves. We choose speed over depth, appearance over endurance. And while the applause may feel good in the moment, the cost is often paid later, when the structure we've rushed starts to crack. Personal reflection. I've been in those moments where I felt the urge to show my work before it was truly ready, to reassure others that I was fine, capable, and on top of things. There's a certain vulnerability in saying, I'm still in process. It can feel like an admission of weakness when in truth it's a sign of wisdom. When I've taken the time to build at my own pace, even if it meant less to show in the short term, the results have been stronger, more aligned, and far more sustainable. It's a quiet kind of confidence, one that doesn't need immediate proof to know it's on the right track. Psychological insight. From a behavioral perspective, the pressure to prove aligns with social comparison theory, Festinger 1954, which suggests that we evaluate ourselves based on how we measure up to others. In a rebuild phase, this can be dangerous. We end up competing in a race we didn't choose on a track that may not even lead where we want to go. The spotlight effect, Gilovich, Medvec, and Savitsky 2000 also plays a role here. The tendency to believe others are paying far more attention to us than they are. This can magnify the sense of being watched and judged, increasing the temptation to rush. In reality, most people are far more focused on their own lives than on the pace of ours. When I've consciously stepped back from the need to display my progress, I've noticed my decisions shift. Without that imagined audience, I could focus on making choices that served my long-term vision, not just my short-term image. And the irony, when the results finally came, they often impressed more because they were thoughtful and enduring, not because they were fast. Insight prompts. Who is in your imagined audience right now, and how might their presence be influencing your pace? If you removed the pressure to prove anything to anyone, what would you do differently in your rebuild? Theory in action. For 1 week, keep your rebuild progress private. No updates, no hints, no outward proof. Instead, document your steps only for yourself. At the end of the week, review what you did and how it felt to work without the weight of an audience. Listening for the right rhythm, every rebuild has its own natural pace. It's shaped by our resources, our energy, and the complexity of what we're creating. But when we've been in survival mode for a long time, our internal metronome can be off. We either overcompensate, racing ahead, or stall completely, afraid to take the next step. Finding the right rhythm means relearning how to listen to ourselves. The pulse of the project. Think of a musician joining a band mid-song. If they rush in without tuning to the tempo, the whole piece feels off. The notes may be correct, but the feeling is wrong, jagged, mismatched, unsettling. But if they take a moment to stand quietly at the side, to let the beat sink in and feel it through their body, they can join seamlessly, adding to the harmony instead of clashing against it. A rebuild is no different. There's a rhythm to healing, a pace to reinvention, and it's not always the one we expect. At times, the tempo may slow almost to stillness, inviting reflection and consolidation. Other times, there will be bursts of quick energy when opportunities align and decisive action makes sense. The challenge is that we can't impose the beat we want onto the process without creating friction. We have to listen to the tempo that's already there and trust that joining it, even if slower than we'd prefer, will lead to something more cohesive and lasting. Personal reflection. I've learned that some of my most grounded and effective choices came when I resisted the urge to jump in, the second I spotted an opening. There were times in the past when I confused activity with progress, filling my days with movement just to avoid the discomfort of stillness. It felt productive, but I later realized I was making decisions without the full picture, which meant doubling back later to repair the things I'd rushed. Slowing down didn't come naturally at first. It felt like a risk, as if standing still for too long might mean losing my chance altogether. But as I began to treat each pause as a space to recalibrate, I noticed something shift. I could hear my priorities more clearly, rather than being swept along by external noise or imagined deadlines. When I allowed myself to tune in, really listening to whether I was energized or depleted, focused or scattered, I started to act from a place of alignment. In work, this meant catching potential mistakes before they happened. In personal life, it meant stepping into conversations and commitments with more clarity, rather than reacting from a place of fear or habit. Over time, I realized that pacing myself wasn't holding me back. It was keeping me in step with the life I was trying to create, rather than the one I was trying to leave behind. Psychological Insight in Psychology, Self-Paced Learning, Zimmerman, 2002, is shown to improve long-term retention and understanding compared to forced pacing. When applied to life changes, it means that allowing ourselves to set and adjust our speed leads to deeper integration of each step. From a physiological perspective, this ties into interoceptive awareness, the ability to sense internal signals like heartbeat, breath, and muscle tension, Craig 2002. People with stronger interoceptive skills tend to make more aligned, less impulsive decisions because they're attuned to subtle shifts in their body's readiness. When I learned to check in with myself during my rebuilding, noticing whether I felt grounded or strained, clear-headed or foggy, I could adjust my pace accordingly. This prevented burnout, reduced avoidable mistakes, and kept me from mistaking urgency for importance. Insight prompts. What signals tell you you're moving at the wrong pace, either too fast or too slow? How do you currently check in with yourself before making big decisions? Theory and action. Before taking your next significant step, pause and tune in. Notice your breathing, your posture, your emotional state. If anything feels tense or rushed, wait until you feel more settled before acting. Track how this affects the outcome compared to decisions made under pressure. Resisting the urgency trap. Urgency can be seductive. It offers the illusion that something important will be lost if we don't act immediately. In reality, urgency often hijacks our decision-making, narrowing our focus to the immediate problem and blocking the broader perspective we need. In a rebuild, this can mean putting in quick fixes instead of thoughtful, lasting solutions. The false alarm. Imagine being woken in the middle of the night by a blaring alarm. Your heart races, adrenaline floods your system, and every instinct tells you to act now. But as you rush towards the sound, you realize it's not a fire at all. It's a faulty smoke detector set off by steam from the shower. That's what urgency often is in a rebuild, a false alarm. It triggers a survival response, narrowing our field of vision, so we act fast, but without considering whether the action is necessary or even helpful. Many of the urgent decisions we feel pressured to make are just fear in disguise, urging us to do something, anything, to regain a sense of control. The trouble is, acting on false urgency can lead us back into the patterns we were trying to break. We patch over deeper issues. We agree to things that don't align with our long-term vision. We build walls quickly, only to have to tear them down again later. Personal reflection. I've fallen for the urgency trap more than once, both in my work and in my personal life. There were moments where I felt the pressure to make a move immediately, whether to seize an opportunity or resolve an uncomfortable situation. Sometimes I convinced myself that if I didn't act right away, I'd lose the moment forever. Looking back, I can see that some of those critical moments weren't critical at all. They were anxiety-driven, spurred on by my discomfort with uncertainty. In the past, this urgency pushed me into conversations I wasn't ready to have, decisions I hadn't fully considered, and projects I wasn't prepared to sustain. Slowing down, especially when everything in me wanted to speed up, felt counterintuitive. But the more I practiced it, the more I saw how many so-called urgent matters resolved themselves, or revealed new details. given just a little more time. Now, when urgency strikes, I ask myself, is this truly urgent or is it just uncomfortable? That pause often changes everything. Psychological insight. The urgency trap is partly explained by the action bias, our tendency to favor doing something over doing nothing, even when waiting or gathering more information might be wiser. Pat and Zeckhauser, 2000. This bias is rooted in evolutionary psychology. Action historically increased our odds of survival. But in modern contexts, especially in rebuilding phases, quick action often comes at the cost of accuracy, alignment, and sustainability. The Yerkes-Dodson Law, 1908, adds nuance here. Moderate stress can enhance performance, but excessive arousal, such as that triggered by perceived urgency, leads to poorer outcomes, especially in complex or unfamiliar situations. In a rebuild, this means that the heightened arousal of urgency can impair judgment, causing us to default to familiar, often unhelpful patterns. In my own life, I've seen how giving space to a decision changes the outcome. When I've resisted the compulsion to fix a situation immediately, I've often found a better and more considered approach that I wouldn't have noticed under the fog of urgency. This isn't passivity, it's strategic patience. Insight prompts. How do you know when you're reacting to true urgency versus false urgency? What's one example from your past where waiting a little longer might have led to a better outcome? Theory in action. The next time you feel the pull of urgency, take 24 hours, unless true harm will come from waiting. Use that time to gather more context, check your emotional state, and consider the long-term implications of acting now versus later. The cost of skipping steps. Every stage in rebuilding serves a purpose. Even the slow, frustrating, or messy stages are laying the groundwork for what comes next. But when we skip steps to get to the good part, the visible progress, we often end up doubling our workload later because the skipped stage catches up with us. The foundation you can't see. If you've ever watched a building being constructed, you know that the most time-consuming work often happens before you see anything rise above ground. The digging, leveling, and reinforcing, all invisible to passers-by, determine whether the structure will stand or crumble. It's tempting to see those early hidden stages as unnecessary delays, especially when the need for visible change feels urgent. But skipping over them or rushing through is like building on loose soil. It may look fine at first, but over time, cracks appear in places you can't easily fix. In life, the same principle applies. The conversations we avoid, the skills we don't learn, the emotional repair we skip over, these missing pieces create instability. And when pressure mounts later, we find ourselves circling back to do the work we avoided the first time. Personal reflection. I've seen this in my work and relationships. There were times when I wanted to move forward so badly that I convinced myself the preparation stage wasn't essential. In projects that meant skipping over thorough checks, assuming I'd catch issues later, only to find that fixing them after the fact took far more time and energy than if I'd addressed them at the start. In personal life, I've experienced how skipping emotional groundwork, not having certain conversations, and not clarifying boundaries led to repeated misunderstandings. It wasn't that I didn't care about those steps. It was that I underestimated their importance in my eagerness to see results. When I slowed down and allowed myself to move through each stage fully, even when it felt tedious, I found I didn't have to go back nearly as often. That patience meant my progress was steady, my relationships clearer, and my work far more resilient to stress. Psychological insight. The tendency to skip steps can be linked to present bias, Leibson 1997, where we overvalue immediate rewards compared to future benefits. In a rebuild, this bias makes us prioritize visible achievements, like launching a project or finalizing a decision, over slower, less visible preparation that ensures lasting success. It's also connected to the Zeigarnik effect, Zeigarnik 1927, which suggests that incomplete tasks create mental tension. Ironically, we often try to relieve that tension by rushing to complete something, even if it means bypassing important stages. While this may bring short-term relief, it leaves weaknesses embedded in the work that resurface later. When I've consciously stayed with the uncomfortable, unseen work, resisting the pull of quick completion, I've noticed a greater sense of confidence in the outcome. It's a discipline that's uncomfortable in the moment but deeply satisfying in the long run. Insight prompts. What's one step in your current process that you're tempted to skip? How might skipping it now create more work for you later? Theory in action. Identify one hidden stage in your rebuild that feels slow or tedious. Commit to completing it fully before moving forward. Keep a brief journal of how it changes the quality and stability of what you're building. Learning from nature's pace. Nature doesn't rush, yet everything gets done. It works in cycles, seasons of planting, growth, harvest, and rest, each with its own timing. When we try to force our rebuild into a constant summer of growth, we ignore the vital seasons that make growth possible. The orchard's patience. Imagine planting an orchard. In the first year, there's nothing but young saplings, fragile, spindly, barely able to support their leaves. You water them, tend to the soil, protect them from pests, but there's no fruit. The second year, they grow taller and stronger, but still the branches are bare. It isn't until years later that the trees offer their first harvest, and even then it's modest. Only after many cycles of nourishment, pruning, and rest do the trees produce abundantly. And when they finally do, that abundance is sustainable because it was built slowly, season by season. A rebuild works in the same way. We may want the fruit immediately, the visible proof that the effort is worth it, but the roots and branches need time. If we try to force growth before the foundation is ready, we risk exhausting the soil, damaging the tree, or creating something that cannot sustain itself. Personal reflection. There have been times in my life when I wanted to be in full bloom before my roots were even set. Whether in creative projects, relationships, or personal development, I've felt that itch to show visible results, to prove to myself and others that I was progressing. But I've also learned that some of my most meaningful growth happened in quieter seasons, when nothing obvious was happening on the surface. These were the times when I was gathering knowledge, building resilience, and quietly reshaping the way I saw the world. Slowing down to honor those quieter seasons wasn't easy. It required trusting that the work was still happening beneath the surface, even if I couldn't yet see it. But when the fruit finally came, the opportunities, the clarity, the deeper connections, it was sweeter because it had been earned over time, and it lasted because the roots were strong. Psychological insight. Nature's pace mirrors what psychologists call incubation periods in creativity and problem solving. Research by Seo and Ormerod, 2009, shows that stepping away from active effort and allowing time for unconscious processing can lead to better solutions and more original ideas. Similarly, gestation theory in personal growth, Bridges, 2004, emphasizes that transformation often involves an unseen, slow building phase before visible change emerges. This isn't stagnation, it's the mind and body integrating shifts at a deep level, preparing for sustainable action. I've found that when I allow space for these natural cycles, instead of demanding constant output, my work carries more depth and my decisions hold up better over time. The temptation to speed through the winter phases still appears, but I've learned to see them as part of the rhythm that makes lasting growth possible. Insight prompts. What season are you in right now? Planting, growing, harvesting, or resting? How can you better support yourself in this stage without rushing to the next? Theory in action. Observe one area of your life as if it were a growing cycle. Identify which stage you're in and adjust your expectations accordingly, focusing on the needs of that stage rather than forcing results from another. Trusting the unfinished work. One of the hardest parts of pacing ourselves is learning to live with the fact that things will stay unfinished for a while. We're so conditioned to celebrate the final product that we forget most of life is spent in the middle, somewhere between the old and the new. The bridge in progress picture crossing a bridge that's still under construction. One side is completely solid, familiar, and easy to walk on. The other side is your destination, the place you've been aiming for. But in the middle, there are gaps, scaffolding, and planks that still need to be fixed in place. Standing there, you can see both where you've come from and where you're going, but you can't rush the construction. If you try to sprint across before the structure is ready, you risk falling through. The safest and wisest thing to do is to trust the process, step carefully, and give the builders time to finish their work. A rebuild is a bridge in progress. It's uncomfortable to stand in the middle, where the uncertainty feels tangible. But this stage teaches us something essential: how to live in motion without demanding immediate completion, and how to feel steady even when the structure beneath us is still taking shape. Personal reflection. There have been times when the unfinished state of things made me restless. I felt the pull to hurry up and get to the final version of my work, my projects, or even myself. But I've also learned that the in-between stage has its value. When I've forced a premature finish in my work or relationships, I've often realized later that it wasn't truly finished at all. There were corners cut, conversations left unspoken, lessons half learned, and those gaps eventually made themselves known. Now I'm learning to treat the unfinished state not as a flaw, but as a natural phase. It's where flexibility lives, the space where you can still make changes, refine your vision, and catch potential missteps before they become permanent. It's also where patience is built, and where I've discovered that the journey is as formative as the destination. Psychological insight. The discomfort of unfinished work links to the need for cognitive closure, Kruglansky and Webster, 1996. A psychological drive to have a firm answer or conclusion as quickly as possible. While closure feels good in the short term, it can cut off important exploration and adaptation in the long term. In growth and rebuilding, resisting premature closure allows for iterative development, a process used in design and therapy alike, where gradual adjustments produce better outcomes than a single rushed completion. The iterative approach mirrors how our brains consolidate learning over time, Bjork, 1994, out-reinforcing new patterns through repetition and reflection rather than one-off changes. In my rebuilding work, embracing this approach has meant living with temporary mess, both literal and emotional, while trusting that it's part of the structure forming beneath me. Insight prompts. What's one area of your life where you've been rushing to finish? What could you gain by allowing it to remain in progress a little longer? Theory in action. Choose one current project or area of growth and intentionally keep it open for review. Spend an extra week or even a month observing, refining, and adding depth before declaring it complete. Track how this changes your satisfaction with the final result. The strength in slow. So if you've ever felt the pull to prove yourself by building quickly, know this: speed isn't always progress. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is give your life permission to unfold at the pace it truly needs. Slowness doesn't mean weakness. It means you're building something strong enough to last, something that won't need to be torn down again because it was rushed into place. When you trust the pace, you give yourself the gift of learning from each stage, of growing roots deep enough to hold, and of creating a life that's not just rebuilt, but truly renewed. You've been listening to The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. Until next time, stay human, stay awake, and let it breathe. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of The Inversiverse: a journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11, The Simulated Self, examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12, The Spell of the Mind, inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13, Conscious Seduction, journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14, The Myth of Sanity, sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15, The Algorithmic Mind, probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16, The Noise of Knowing, reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17, Belief Machines, delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18, Submerged Signals, examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19, The Alchemy Within traces food, frequency, and the forgotten intelligence of the body. Episode 20, Encoded Flesh, scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.